Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Maybe because she was the only woman in the room. Or maybe because, to them, she was just the backup spotter. Staff Sergeant Raina Voss stood at the back of the operations tent, arms folded, jaw locked tight, while the SEAL team commander spoke without ever once looking in her direction. The air smelled like burnt coffee, gun oil, and ego. She'd been attached to Task Unit Trident as Overwatch support, a temporary Army sniper assigned to a Navy SEAL element for one mission. But tonight, 24 men would walk into a valley that she knew, with absolute certainty, was a kill zone. And nobody wanted to hear it. She's just the backup spotter. No need to brief her on the ARP, someone had said an hour earlier dismissively. Now she stood in silence, watching them plan their own funeral. Raina had been watching the valley for 3 days straight, 72 hours of dry wind, sleepless nights, and endless glassing through a spotting scope that had become more of a confessional than a tool. The Afghan sun beat down on the ridgelines during the day, and the desert cold sank into her bones at night. But her scope didn't lie. Through that narrow tube of glass, she'd seen what the drone feeds had missed. Fresh fighting positions carved into the rock, camouflaged trenches, and faint traces of disturbed soil. The kind that only appeared when men carried heavy weapons into place. Her hand still trembled slightly as she flipped open her range notebook, its pages filled with coordinates, times, and head counts. She'd logged enemy movement across the eastern ridge, 12 fighting positions, at least 38 hostiles, with interlocking fields of fire. A textbook ambush. The kind of thing you couldn't talk your way out of once it began. "Senior Chief," she said finally, her voice steady but low, "you're walking your men straight into a funnel." The room went still for half a second. Then came the chuckle, that tired, patronizing laugh that had followed her through every male-dominated unit she'd ever served in. Senior Chief Marcus Webb, the SEAL commander, didn't even glance at her. "We've got current ISR showing the area clear," he said, laser pointer tracing across the map. "Maybe your scope needs cleaning." The laughter returned. She wanted to scream, but she didn't. She learned a long time ago that rage wasted oxygen. Instead, she stepped forward, placing her open range book on the table. "These aren't random shepherds," she said. "No radios, no thermal signatures. They're running old-school couriers' flag signals. I've seen them practicing L-shaped ambush drills during prayer hours." A young intel lieutenant, probably not a day over 23, looked up from his tablet for all of 2 seconds. "Could be civilians," he murmured. "We've seen farmers with AKs before." Voss didn't blink. Farmers don't dig bunkers into ridgelines. That earned her silence, but not respect. Webb finally turned, arms folded across his chest. "Sergeant," he said, the word thick with condescension, "I've been running ops in this valley since you were in high school. We'll stick to the plan. You just make sure you can keep up with your rifle when we move." And that was it. Decision made. Fate sealed. That night, Raina sat alone on the roof of the command post. The Afghan desert stretched endlessly before her, a world of shadows and silence. Her rifle lay beside her like an old friend. The M110 semi-automatic sniper system, the same weapon that had never once failed her. She ran her hand along its smooth receiver, feeling the etched metal cool against her skin. It was heavy, almost 15 pounds loaded, but its weight was reassuring. It was the only thing in her life that ever listened when she spoke. The men downstairs were laughing, cleaning weapons, swapping stories. She could hear the muffled echo of music, something country, something about home. But her mind wasn't there. It was back on her grandfather's ranch in Montana, the smell of rain and dust, the crack of a .308 echoing through the hills. He'd been a Marine sniper in Vietnam, quiet, steady, unshakable. He taught her everything that mattered. "The most dangerous thing in combat," he'd said, "isn't the enemy, Ray. It's an officer who thinks his rank makes him smarter than reality. She smiled sadly, whispering into the wind, "You were right again, Grandpa." At 200, she packed light 3 extra magazines, a rangefinder, and the old range book tucked into her plate carrier. She didn't tell anyone she was moving early. The team would step off at 300. She left before them, alone. The mountains swallowed her as she climbed toward Hill 842, her designated overwatch. The air was razor-thin, her lungs burning by the time she reached the top. She'd hiked miles through shifting gravel and broken rock, every sound swallowed by the endless night. By 2:30, she was in position. The stars above were brutal and bright, scattered across the black like shrapnel frozen in time. Through her scope, the valley below glowed in shades of gray, ghosts of men, trees, and death waiting to breathe. She checked her watch, 2:59. 1 minute. Trident 6 to Overwatch, Oscar Mike to Checkpoint Alpha, came the radio call. Her heartbeat slowed, a rhythm she'd trained herself to control. She could feel the trigger's smooth curve under her finger, the faint pull of wind brushing across her cheek. Through the thermal sight, she saw them, 24 heat signatures moving in formation down the valley floor. Her scope tracked each one as they advanced, tiny dots of light marching straight toward the kill zone she'd mapped. Her lips parted, barely a whisper escaping. "Please don't do this." 10 minutes until contact. She switched her radio on again. Overwatch to Trident 6. Recommend shift north 200 meters. Multiple probable positions in Sector Charlie. Static. Then Webb's voice curt. "Negative Overwatch, we're maintaining course." Of course. Her eyes caught motion on the ridge, faint glimmers of heat. The enemy fighters were moving into final positions. She could see the outline of PKM machine guns being mounted, bipods locking in, barrels leveled. Her throat went dry. She clicked off the safety. The first fighter rose to his knees. Scope focus. Crosshair steady. 912 meters. Wind, 3/4 value from the left. Target elevation, 40 meters above her. She exhaled long, even. And squeezed. The suppressed rifle cracked softly, like someone snapping a branch far away. The man dropped instantly. The bullet reached him before the sound did. Bolt pull, eject chamber sight. Second target, the PKM gunner adjusting his fire arc. She squeezed again. The man's body folded over the weapon, his trigger hand spasming, sending the burst high into the rocks. Then the valley erupted. Trident 6, Overwatch contact imminent. Multiple enemy positions 2 o'clock high, 800 to 900 meters. She didn't wait for permission. There was no time for protocol. The SEALs scrambled for cover, bullets cracking past them like angry insects. Reyna became a machine not of war but of purpose, every movement deliberate, every breath calibrated. She prioritized targets, gunners first, then spotters, then anyone who looked like they were shouting orders. Her rifle bucked gently against her shoulder, the suppressor dulling the thunder to a whisper. The valley echoed with chaos, return fire slamming into rock faces near her position. Tracers stitched the air, green and red lines cutting through the darkness. 12 rounds gone, reload smooth, controlled. 4 enemy fighters broke from the ridge, trying to flank the SEALs from the east. She caught them one by one at 750 meters. Easier shots, clean. The fight lasted 19 minutes, 19 eternal, bone-crushing minutes. When the final shot echoed into silence, Reyna exhaled for the first time. Her hands trembled slightly, the adrenaline draining from her veins. Below, the SEALs were regrouping, alive, every single one of them. She radioed softly, voice calm, Trident 6 Overwatch, enemy breaking contact, withdrawing northwest. 14 EKIA from this position. Recommend RTB. Static again. Then a voice Webb's quieter this time. Copy that, Overwatch. For the first time, there was no arrogance in his tone, only disbelief and respect. Hours later, back at base, the debrief room was silent. Predator drone footage replayed on a large screen, the same valley, now littered with enemy positions. The imagery revealed exactly what Reyna had warned them about: 38 fighters, entrenched, ready. Had she not fired that first shot, none of them would have made it home. The Navy captain conducting the review looked from the screen to her, expression unreadable. "Staff Sergeant Voss," he said slowly, "your actions prevented what would have been a catastrophic loss of life. I'll be forwarding a Silver Star recommendation." She didn't answer. She just stared at the table, eyes unfocused, replaying each trigger pull in her head. Because medals didn't matter. Lives did. When she finally stepped outside, the night air felt colder than before. One by one, the SEALs approached her. No jokes this time, no smirks, just quiet handshakes. One of them, a young comms operator, said softly, "I owe you my life." Reyna nodded, unable to speak. As the last of them walked away, she looked toward the dark horizon, the same valley still burning faintly under moonlight. And for the first time in years, she felt something new. Not pride, not relief. Just peace. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. Why did she feel more hollow than proud? Staff Sergeant Reyna Voss sat alone on a sandbag wall behind the operations compound, the Afghan dawn painting the sky in dull amber. The base buzzed with morning movement, convoys rolling out, engines coughing to life, the metallic clatter of men preparing for the next mission. She sat still, motionless except for the slow rise and fall of her chest. The rifle lay across her knees, a quiet witness to everything that had happened a few hours earlier. 24 men were alive because she broke the chain of command. And yet, she couldn't shake the weight pressing against her heart. It wasn't guilt, not exactly. It was something heavier, the knowledge that she'd done the right thing, but in a system that didn't reward disobedience, no matter how justified. Inside the command tent, her name echoed in muffled tones. She could hear them talking: Senior Chief Webb, the Task Force XO, the intel officer, words tumbling between discipline and gratitude. She didn't need to hear the details. She already knew what came next: an investigation, a review board, maybe worse. Disobeying direct orders, even to save lives, didn't sit well with bureaucracy. She'd seen it before: heroes buried under paperwork, truth replaced with phrasing like uncoordinated engagement or unauthorized lethal response. Her stomach turned at the thought. The radio had gone quiet hours ago, but her mind replayed every sound: the snap of rounds, the metallic rhythm of her bolt, the whisper of the suppressor. 19 minutes of controlled chaos, and the silence after, the silence that still rang in her ears. When Webb finally emerged from the tent, his shoulders were slumped. The proud, unflinching commander from the briefing room looked different now, older, quieter. He saw her sitting there, and paused for a long moment before walking over. "Sergeant Voss." She looked up slowly. Her face was streaked with dust and sweat, her eyes bloodshot from hours behind glass. "Senior Chief." He nodded once, awkward, searching for words that didn't come easy to a man like him. "You saved my men. You saved me. That's not something I can repay." She studied him carefully. "You can," she said. "Next time someone tells you the ground looks different than your map, listen to them." He gave a faint smile, just enough to say he understood. Then he reached into his cargo pocket and pulled out a patch, a small, subdued Trident insignia. SEAL Team colors. He extended it to her. "We don't hand these out much," he said quietly, "but my team wanted you to have it. You earned it." For the first time in days, Reyna didn't know what to say. She took the patch with both hands, her thumb brushing the fabric. No ceremony, no applause, just the quiet exchange between warriors who had been through hell and come back breathing. Later that afternoon, the investigation team arrived from Bagram. 3 officers, Army, Navy, and JAG, each with folders, tablets, and the kind of cold detachment that came from reviewing death on paper. They called her in for the formal statement. The interrogation tent was small and airless. One oscillating fan did its best to move the heat around, accomplishing nothing. She sat straight-backed, boots dusty, uniform still stained from the Overwatch sight. The Navy JAG officer, a woman, maybe late 30s, with eyes that looked more tired than stern, led the questioning. "Staff Sergeant Voss," she began, "you engaged multiple enemy combatants without direct authorization from your commanding officer, correct?" "Yes, ma'am," Reyna answered evenly, "after confirming imminent hostile intent toward friendly forces." "Why did you not wait for confirmation?" Reyna's jaw flexed, "Because if I had waited, they'd all be dead." The Army officer scribbled something in his notes. The JAG looked at her over the rim of her glasses. "You're aware this engagement could be considered an independent initiation of lethal force?" Reyna's gaze didn't waver. "I'm aware it was the only choice." There was silence then, the kind that fills rooms when truth makes people uncomfortable. The JAG officer leaned back, exhaling. "And your observation data, it matched later satellite imagery, correct?" Reyna nodded. "Every position, every mark, they were there the whole time." The officer closed her folder, noted. That was it. No applause, no condemnation, just a single word standing between her and uncertainty. For 2 days, she stayed in her quarters, waiting for whatever decision came next. Outside, she could hear the helicopters come and go, the low hum of war never quite stopping. Sometimes, one of the SEALs would drop by, a silent knock on the door, a quiet thank you and nothing more. She didn't need words. Each visit said enough. On the 3rd morning, the task force commander called her in. He stood behind his desk, hands clasped behind his back. Navy uniform crisp, voice calm. "At ease, Sergeant, I'll keep this brief." Reyna remained silent. "The review board has completed its assessment," he continued. "Your actions are deemed justified under active engagement protocol. You identified a credible, imminent threat to friendly forces and responded appropriately. You will receive no disciplinary action." Reyna exhaled slowly, not relief, just release. He looked at her for a long time, then added, "The recommendation for the Silver Star has been endorsed. Final approval will go through Central Command." She blinked once, nodding faintly. "Understood, sir." The captain softened slightly. "You did good work, Sergeant. You saved lives. Just remember next time, make sure the chain of command is with you before you pull the trigger." She gave a tired smile. "Sir, if there's a next time like that, there won't be time to ask." The captain almost smiled back. "Fair point." That night the sky over the valley turned crimson, not from fire, but from the sunset bleeding through dust and haze. Reyna climbed the watchtower at the edge of camp, M110 slung over her shoulder, helmet off, hair pulled back. She leaned against the railing, watching the horizon. For the first time since it all happened, she let herself feel it, the quiet tremor of memory. The faces, the sounds, the sharp inhale before every shot. Her mind drifted to one of the SEALs, the comms operator, barely more than a kid, who'd said, "I owe you my life." She wondered if he'd go home now, if he'd tell his family about the woman they almost didn't let sit at the briefing table. Probably not. The story would stay here, buried in dust and silence. And maybe that was okay. Weeks later, new orders came through. She was being reassigned to the Special Operations Target Interdiction course, the same sniper school where she'd once broken records, this time as an instructor. She packed her gear methodically, stripping her weapon down piece by piece, cleaning each component with care. Every mission left something behind, a memory, a scar, a truth. This one left all three. When she zipped her rifle case shut, she ran her hand along the tag stitched to its side, VOSS, R, faded, frayed, but still legible. At the airstrip, the SEALs were waiting. Webb stood in front, the rest of his men behind him. They didn't salute. They didn't need to. Webb stepped forward, offering his hand. "Wherever they send you next, Sergeant, they'll be lucky to have you." Reyna shook it firmly. "Same to you, Chief. Try not to get killed because you ignored a woman next time." That drew a low laugh from the group. Webb nodded, the faintest grin on his weathered face. Lesson learned. As she walked toward the waiting transport, one of the SEALs called out, "Hey, Voss." She turned. He raised a thumb. "We call that valley the Angel's Cut now, because that's where an angel decided to shoot first." The ramp closed behind her before she could answer. Back in the States, months later, Reyna's new world was quieter, pine trees instead of deserts, rifle reports instead of mortars. At the sniper school range, she stood before a class of young candidates, men and women who still believed precision could be learned from books. Her eyes scanned them, nervous, eager, full of untested confidence. She began her first lesson, the way her grandfather once had. "The most important shots you'll ever take," she said softly, "are the ones nobody ordered you to take. Because in the end, your job isn't to follow a plan. It's to keep people alive when the plan meets reality." The recruits stared at her, absorbing the gravity of her tone. Then she looked down the line of targets, white silhouettes against green hills, and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. Later that night, after the range had gone silent, Reyna sat alone again. Different stars now, softer, friendlier. She sipped coffee from a tin mug and thought about the valley, the men she'd saved, the rules she'd broken. She knew there would always be questions, the kind that didn't have answers, but she'd stopped needing them. Because she finally understood something her grandfather had tried to teach her long ago. Courage isn't defying orders. It's carrying the weight of the choice you made after you did. And sometimes, silence is the loudest kind of courage. Why did teaching feel harder than combat? Staff Sergeant Reyna Voss stood on the firing line at Fort Benning Sniper School, the late summer heat pressing down like a physical weight. Dust rose with every footstep, clinging to her boots, her rifle, her thoughts. The recruits lay prone behind their rifles, breathing heavy, trying to steady their scopes. "Wind is your first enemy," she said quietly, walking between them. "It never stops, it only hides." She paused behind one trainee, a young Marine, hands trembling as he tried to adjust his scope. "You're chasing it," she told him softly. "Stop reacting. Anticipate it, feel it." The Marine swallowed, nodded. Voss crouched beside him, looking downrange. Silhouettes of steel targets shimmered under the heat mirage. "You think it's about hitting the bulls?" she asked. "It's not. It's about patience. You wait until the world lines up with your breathing." He fired, missed. She said nothing, just looked at him until he found the courage to reload. After hours on the range, when the echoes had died and the recruits packed up, Voss stayed behind. She liked the silence after the noise, the way the world seemed to inhale and hold its breath. She lay prone on the line, sighted down her rifle, and exhaled. The world narrowed to a circle of glass and steel. The target fell. Perfect center. And still she felt nothing. It had been 3 months since Afghanistan, and yet some nights she still heard the whispers of the valley, wind scraping across rocks, the dull thud of distant mortars, the echo of her own pulse between each shot. She didn't dream much anymore. When she did, it wasn't of the men she'd saved. It was of the ones she'd seen through her scope, faceless figures she never hated but had to kill anyway. The medal sat in a drawer, still in its velvet box. She hadn't attended the ceremony. The army mailed it to her instead. She opened the package once, then closed it again. Recognition didn't heal anything. It never did. One evening, as the sun melted behind the pine ridge, she heard footsteps on the gravel outside the range hut. "Permission to approach, ma'am," a young voice asked. She turned, a female recruit, maybe 21, uniform too crisp to have been worn long. "Come in," Voss said. The recruit stepped inside, clutching her notebook like it was a shield. "Staff Sergeant, I just wanted to ask about something you said earlier, about shots nobody ordered you to take." Voss studied her for a long moment. The girl's eyes were bright, unsure but brave. "What about it?" The recruit hesitated. "Doesn't that go against, everything we're taught about following orders?" Voss leaned back against the table, arms folded. "You're not wrong. Orders keep the machine moving. But war," she looked toward the window at the darkening tree line, "war doesn't care about the machine. Sometimes the person you save doesn't have a rank. Sometimes they don't even have a name yet, but you save them anyway." The recruit frowned slightly. "So, you decide when to pull the trigger." Voss shook her head. "No, the moment decides, you just live with it after." The girl looked at her, studying her face, trying to understand the weight behind the words. Then she nodded slowly. "Thank you, ma'am." "Get some rest," Voss said quietly. When the door closed, she stood alone again, the last light fading from the window. Weeks passed. The recruits came and went, faces she'd teach for a few months before they disappeared into the endless rotation of conflict. But one recruit stayed in her mind. Private Alex Hanley, 22, from Oregon. Calm, analytical, too quiet for his own good. He reminded her of herself, years ago, before the noise and the medals and the silence that followed both. Hanley wasn't the fastest or the strongest, but he had focus. He could hold a scope for hours without twitching, could read the wind through grass instead of instruments. One afternoon, while reviewing his data sheet, she noticed the pattern. His calculations were perfect, but he never fired the moment he should have. He hesitated. "Why do you pause?" she asked him after class. He looked down, nervous. "I just think about what happens after." She tilted her head. "After?" "After the bullet leaves," he said softly. "Like, what if I'm wrong? What if it's not who I think?" For a moment, Voss couldn't speak. That hesitation, that awareness, it was something she hadn't seen in a long time. "You'll make a good sniper," she finally said. He looked confused, but I hesitated. She nodded. "Exactly. The day you stop thinking about what happens after, that's the day you shouldn't pull the trigger." That night a storm rolled in over the training base. Thunder crawled across the sky, rain hammering the metal roof. Voss sat in her small quarters, cleaning her rifle by lamplight. A knock came at the door. "Enter." It was the school commander, Lieutenant Colonel Dawes, a man who'd served long enough to have salt in both his beard and his tone. He held a file in one hand. "Evening, Sergeant." "Sir." He placed the file on her desk. "You've been requested for advisory support, real-world tasking, overseas." Raina looked up sharply. "I'm an instructor now." "You are," he said, "but Command wants you on this. It's a joint extraction mission, classified. 300 operators stranded after a convoy ambush, high-altitude region. They need someone who's worked long-range overwatch in that terrain." Her pulse slowed. "Where?" "Eastern Hindu Kush." The words hit like a weight to the chest. The same range of mountains where she'd last fired in anger. "When?" 72 hours. He paused. "You don't have to accept, Sergeant. You've done enough for this lifetime." Raina stared at the file, silent. Inside were satellite photos, maps, intercepted transmissions. She saw the familiar topography, ridgelines she'd studied before, valleys she could still picture from memory. "Who's in command?" she asked. "Webb." Her head lifted slowly. "Marcus Webb." Dawes nodded. "Same man, now task force commander. He asked for you by name." Raina exhaled, a slow, steady sound that carried more emotion than she'd meant to show. "Understood, sir," she said quietly. "I'll go." That night, sleep didn't come. She lay on her bunk staring at the ceiling fan turning above her, the old shadows of Afghanistan creeping back into her mind. Why had he asked for her? Because he trusted her now, because he knew what she'd done. Or maybe because he was trying to make peace with the ghosts of his own command. Either way, she couldn't say no. Not to him, not to the men trapped in that valley. By dawn, she was airborne. The aircraft hummed steady as it cut through cloud and silence. Raina sat near the ramp, gear strapped down beside her, M110, optics, suppressor, ballistic calculator, range books. The pilot's voice crackled through comms, 30 mics to LZ. She looked out through the small window, endless mountain spines reaching into the horizon, jagged and merciless. Somewhere down there, 300 soldiers were fighting to stay alive. Her stomach clenched with a familiar, unexplainable fear, not of dying, but of failing. She checked her rifle again, clean, ready, always ready. When they landed at forward operating base coast, Webb was waiting. He looked older, leaner, with new scars along his jawline, but the eyes were the same, calm, sharp. "Staff Sergeant," he said, offering his hand. She took it, firm, steady. "Senior Chief," she said automatically, then corrected herself. "Sorry, Task Force Commander." He smirked faintly. "You can still call me Webb." "Copy that." They walked toward the operations tent together, boots crunching gravel. "It's good to see you again," he said. "Didn't think you'd call me back for round two," she said lightly. He chuckled, then his tone hardened. 300 men cut off in the eastern range. Communications jammed. Limited air support due to weather. It's a mess. She nodded. "And you want me on Overwatch?" "I want you where the view's clearest," Webb said. "We've got a pilot who'll insert you and your spotter before dawn." "Spotter?" "Private Alex Hanley." Raina blinked. "He's one of my students." "He's already in theater. Said if you were coming, he'd volunteer." A flicker of pride mixed with worry passed across her face. "He's good," she said quietly, "but he's never seen the real thing." Webb's gaze softened. "Neither had I before that valley you saved us from. We all start somewhere." She looked out at the mountains. Their peaks glowed faintly in the last light of day, distant, indifferent, eternal. She felt the weight of the past pressing in, the echoes of every shot, every loss, every moment she doubted herself. And deep down, she knew, this mission wasn't just about saving others. It was about seeing if she still believed in what she'd once fought for. The next dawn would decide everything. Because sometimes fate doesn't ask twice, it just sends coordinates. Why did the air feel different before a mission? Heavy, charged, like the world itself was holding its breath. The helicopter blades thundered above the dark ridgelines, throwing dust and gravel into a storm around the landing zone. Raina Voss sat strapped in beside her new spotter, Private Alex Hanley, helmets tilted forward under the vibration, both gripping their rifles like lifelines. 10 mics to drop point, the pilot called through the headset. Raina glanced sideways at Hanley. His eyes were fixed on the floor, lips pressed tight, jaw locked. Fear, quiet, disciplined fear, not panic, just awareness. She remembered that look. She'd worn it once. "You good?" she asked over the engine roar. He nodded. "Good, Staff Sergeant." "Don't lie to me." He cracked a nervous half-smile. "Nervous, ma'am, but steady." She nodded. "Good, keep both. One keeps you alive, the other gets the job done." They dropped into the mountains before dawn. The helicopter vanished into the dark as soon as they disembarked, leaving them swallowed by silence. Just two figures against a vast sea of jagged stone and biting wind. Raina adjusted her rucksack, scanning the horizon through her night optics. "Elevations higher than forecast," she muttered. "Air, thin. Adjust your breathing early." "Yes, ma'am." Their destination lay 1.8 kilometers east, a ridge overlooking the Hadir Pass, where 300 trapped seals were holding out in a narrow defile, surrounded by high ground on all sides. Communication was intermittent, supply drops unreliable, air cover impossible. Command had ordered a defensive hold until extraction was possible, but Reyna knew what that really meant. Hold until you run out of options. The climb took hours. By sunrise, they reached a ledge just below the crest of the ridge, high enough for a clear view, low enough for concealment. Reyna set her pack down, breathing slow, methodical. She checked her scope, dialed the elevation, then unfolded her rangefinder. Hanley spread the camo netting, building a crude hide from rock and brush. His movements were quiet but precise. She could tell he'd been trained well. "Check in," she said softly. He lifted his binos. Visual on smoke about 1 click north. Looks like a flare, could be distress. "Could be bait," she murmured. She crawled forward, glassing the valley below. The terrain was brutal, sheer cliffs and narrow passes choked with rock slides. Through the haze, she could see faint movement, clusters of heat signatures, scattered like embers in the dark. Hanley whispered, friendly. "Not unless they've started wearing black scarves," she said. He swallowed hard. "That's a lot of movement." Reyna adjusted her scope. "And it's coordinated. Mortar teams here, here, and here." She pointed with her pencil. "They're pinning down the trapped teams with indirect fire. Once the ammo's gone, they'll close in." Hanley frowned. "Command said extraction within 24. She gave him a look that said she'd stopped believing official timelines a long time ago. The first mortar launched just after noon. A dull thump echoed through the valley, followed by a rising whistle and a distant explosion. Through her scope, Reyna watched the trapped unit's perimeter, small puffs of dust marking near impacts. Hanley's breathing quickened. "They're bracketing." "Yep." Another shell landed closer. Reyna switched to thermal. The enemy spotters were adjusting fire from a ridge 2 kilometers north, well beyond the range of the trapped seals' rifles. She exhaled slowly. "Got them." Hanley looked through his spotting scope. "Range 2180, elevation plus 40 meters, wind quarter value from west. Engagement distance beyond our comfortable range, but not impossible." He hesitated. "Orders." Reyna's jaw tightened. "Orders." She radioed command. "Overwatch 2 to Task Force. Enemy mortar teams observed North Ridge, grid 737 by 841. Request clearance to engage." Static, then a voice, the command relay. "Negative, Overwatch, stand by. Fire mission pending drone confirmation." Her pulse ticked in irritation. "They'll have moved by then." "Negative, engage, Sergeant. Hold your position." She clicked the radio off. Hanley looked at her. "What do we do?" Reyna said nothing for a long time. The valley thundered again, another explosion, this one closer. Smoke drifted through her lens. She felt the familiar pull, that edge between obedience and instinct. Her mind flashed back to the last time she'd ignored a negative engage. The sound of Webb's voice, the screams, the silence after. Hanley spoke again quietly. "Staff Sergeant, they're getting torn up down there." Reyna's heartbeat slowed. She reached for her rifle. "Target 1 far left, spot for me." Hanley froze. "Ma'am, we don't have clearance." She looked at him, calm, certain. "You're right, we don't, but they don't have time to wait for permission." He swallowed, understood. The wind hissed across the rocks as Reyna settled behind the rifle. The world collapsed to breath, scope, and math. "Range 2180, Hanley said. "Adjust .2 mils for wind drift." "Copy." Her finger rested on the trigger, a single breath anchoring her world. "Exhale, squeeze." The shot echoed like thunder through thin air. Half a second later, a dark shape folded on the ridge. "Impact," Hanley whispered. Target down. Next. They worked like machinery, silent, efficient, synchronized. Spotter calls, trigger breaks, brass clinking softly against stone. 3 rounds, 3 dead mortar crew. Then movement. A figure rushed forward to grab the firing tube. Raina tracked him, steadied. Crack. Gone. She watched through the scope as the remaining hostiles scrambled backward, abandoning the site. Hanley lowered his binos, mortars silent. Raina nodded, lowering her rifle. Let's hope command forgives us later. Hanley smirked nervously. If they don't, maybe they'll give us a medal again. Raina didn't smile. That's not why we're here. An hour later, the radio crackled again. Overwatch 2, this is Trident Actual. Webb's voice, calm, controlled, but carrying a tone only she could read. Send traffic, Raina said. Drone confirms enemy mortar positions neutralized. Nice work. Next time, though, wait for authorization. She allowed herself a faint grin. Copy, sir. I'll try to adjust my timing next time fate checks in. He chuckled softly. We're holding position, but extraction windows closing. Weather coming in from the north. I'll need your eyes for the night. Understood, we're not moving. Good, and Raina, thank you. The line went quiet. Hanley exhaled. He said your name. She glanced at him. He earned that right once. By nightfall, the temperature had dropped below freezing. The mountain wind cut through their ghillie suits like knives. Raina lay prone under the netting, eyes glued to her scope. The valley below flickered with muzzle flashes and tracer rounds like lightning in miniature. The trapped unit was still holding, but barely. Hanley's voice was low. Staff Sergeant, I've got movement along the western ridge. 12 heat signatures, moving in pairs. Flanking force, she muttered. They're trying to cut off retreat. She adjusted her position, fingers numb from the cold. Range 1420, angle up 15 degrees, winds shifted, call it half value. Got it. She breathed in slow. The scope fogged at the edges, her vision tunneling. Her muscles screamed from hours without movement, but she ignored it. Another breath, another squeeze. A flash, a fall, a pause, another shot. Each trigger pull was a heartbeat in the dark. Hanley's whisper came steady. Impact, impact, correction up 0.1 mil, perfect. They worked through the night. Precision, patience, pain. By dawn, 36 enemy fighters lay scattered along the ridges. Each one stopped before they reached the trapped teams. As the first sunlight touched the peaks, the radio came alive again. Overwatch 2, this is Trident Actual. Extraction birds inbound. Good work up there. Raina sat up slowly, stretching aching limbs. She looked over at Hanley, eyes bloodshot, lips cracked but smiling faintly. You did well, she said softly. He looked down. I just followed your lead. She shook her head. No, you followed your conscience, that's rarer. The sound of rotors grew louder. Black hawks slicing through thin air, descending into the valley. The surviving teams waved smoke grenades, signaling extraction. Raina watched through her scope as men climbed aboard, exhausted, battered, alive. For a moment, she let herself breathe. Then her radio buzzed again. Overwatch 2, hold position. We've got unconfirmed heat signatures East Ridge, near your location. Her hand froze on the dial. Hanley's head snapped toward her. They're talking about us. Yeah. She flipped her scope toward the ridge behind them, nothing but rocks and wind. Then a flicker, movement. Her heart kicked once hard. Contact rear, she hissed. 2, 3, 4 shapes emerging from the mist, closer than she liked, too close. Hanley, back me up. He pivoted, pulling his rifle. Gunfire cracked across the ledge. Sparks burst from rock. Raina rolled, returning fire 2 rounds, 1 hit. Hanley shouted, they're flanking left. Raina fired again. Another impact, another silence. She looked over. Hanley was down on one knee, clutching his shoulder, blood soaking through fabric. "Hanley." "I'm fine," he gasped, "just grazed." She dragged him behind cover, heart pounding. The last attacker was moving fast, closing distance. She steadied her rifle, waited one breath, one beat, then fired. The man fell before he ever reached them. Silence. Raina exhaled, the adrenaline burning away as quickly as it came. She pressed her hand against Hanley's wound, high on the shoulder, bleeding but not deep. "Pressure, keep pressure," she ordered. He nodded weakly, eyes wide. "Did we just—" "Yeah," she said, voice flat. "We just almost died." He gave a shaky laugh. "You weren't kidding about wind being the first enemy." She smirked. "You'll learn." Hours later, the last helicopter circled back for them. Raina helped Hanley to his feet. They climbed aboard, the valley shrinking below, a scar in the earth that had almost swallowed hundreds of men. She looked down through the open ramp, wind tearing at her face. The mountains rolled away beneath her, vast, endless, and indifferent. Somewhere between heaven and hell, she realized something. It wasn't luck that saved them. It wasn't fate. It was choice. The choice to act when silence would have been safer. As the helicopter disappeared into the horizon, she closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she whispered a prayer, not for herself, but for every soldier still waiting for permission to do what was right. Because sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is stop waiting for someone to tell you to. Why did returning to base feel harder than the firefight itself? The helicopter thudded onto the tarmac at Fob Coast, its rotors kicking up a cloud of grit and memory. Staff Sergeant Raina Voss stepped out first, rifle slung across her shoulder, dust clinging to every inch of her fatigues. Behind her, Private Hanley followed, arm in a sling, face pale but alive. They'd done it, pulled 300 trapped operators out of a mountain hell. But the silence that greeted them wasn't celebration. It was the kind of silence that follows when people don't yet know if you're a hero or a problem. 2 MPs waited near the command tent. Not aggressive, just standing there, eyes neutral, hands resting on their belts. Raina didn't need to ask why, she already knew. Inside the debriefing room, the air was thick with tension and coffee gone stale. Commander Webb stood near the front, uniform wrinkled, exhaustion carved into his features. He gave her a faint nod when she entered, but the others didn't meet her eyes. 3 officers sat behind a table, one from CENTCOM, one from JAG, and one from Joint Command Oversight. They didn't look angry, they looked cautious, like they were staring at a loaded weapon. "Staff Sergeant Voss," the lead officer began, voice clipped, "you engaged without authorization again." Raina didn't flinch. "Yes, sir." "Explain." She took a slow breath, her voice steady, quiet. 300 soldiers were surrounded. Mortar teams had firing solutions. Command confirmation was delayed. We acted. "We, meaning you and your spotter." "Yes, sir." "Do you understand what negative engage means, Sergeant?" "I do." "And yet you ignored it." Raina's gaze held his. "Yes, sir, because the situation didn't ignore us." For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the old air conditioner. Then the JAG officer leaned forward, folding his hands. "Sergeant, this is the second time you've disobeyed a direct hold order. While your actions resulted in saved lives, you've also broken protocol," she finished for him. "Yes, sir, I've heard that one before." The officer's tone hardened. "This isn't a joke." "Neither was the mission, sir," she replied, voice tightening. "We didn't have time to wait for authorization from a desk 3,000 miles away. Those mortar teams would have wiped the entire unit." Webb cleared his throat, stepping forward. "With respect, sir, she's right. We were pinned. Communications lag was over 6 minutes. If she hadn't acted, we wouldn't be having this meeting because none of us would be here." The CENTCOM officer frowned. Commander Webb, we're not disputing the results, we're assessing conduct. Raina looked between them, men debating her morality like it was a line item on a report. Finally, she said softly, "You can assess my conduct all you want, but I didn't pull that trigger for approval. I did it because someone had to." After the questioning, they dismissed her to the outer corridor while they deliberated. Hanley sat waiting on a bench, shoulder bandaged, exhaustion painted under his eyes. "They grilling you?" he asked. "Something like that." He gave a lopsided grin. "We still did the right thing, though." She looked at him, and for the first time she realized he truly believed that, without hesitation, without regret. That belief reminded her of the part of herself she'd almost buried. "Yeah," she said softly, "we did." He leaned back against the wall. "They'll give you another medal for this, you know." Raina chuckled, a small, humorless sound. "I don't need another medal. I just need to stop seeing faces when I close my eyes." Hanley hesitated. "The ones you saved or the ones you did?" Raina's eyes flicked down. "Both." The board called them back in half an hour later. The verdict was as expected, sanitized, diplomatic, meaningless. Actions deemed operationally justified but procedurally unauthorized. She wouldn't face charges. She wouldn't face commendation either. Just a note in her file, "Demonstrated exceptional field initiative, requires supervisory oversight." Webb looked like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. Not there, not under those eyes. As they exited the tent, he finally caught up with her. "You all right?" he asked quietly. She shrugged. "You know how it goes, the paperwork gets the final word." He nodded grimly. "They'll never understand what it's like on the ridge." "No," she said, "they won't." That night the base was quiet. She sat outside the barracks under a fractured sky, stars dim through the dust. Hanley found her there, 2 tin mugs in hand. "Coffee?" he said simply. She took one, the warmth seeping into her fingers. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the perimeter lights blink in rhythm with the distant hum of generators. Finally Hanley spoke. "You think we'll get sent home soon?" Raina smiled faintly. "You will. I've still got a few ghosts left to argue with." He looked at her, confusion crossing his face. "You ever regret it, the first one, or this one?" She took a long sip before answering. "Every day and never once." Hanley frowned. "That doesn't make sense." "It's not supposed to," she said. "That's the thing they don't teach you, the right call and the easy call rarely shake hands." He stared into his cup. "I still hear it sometimes, the gunfire, the sound of it." "Good," she said quietly. "That means you're still human." Morning brought new orders. Webb met her at the operations tent, a folder in hand. "They're rotating you back to the States," he said. "Advisory leave pending reassignment." Raina raised an eyebrow. Translation: "Time to disappear quietly before I make another bad example." He gave a half smile. "Something like that." He handed her a small package. "Before you go." Inside was a worn metal tag, dull with scratches, an unofficial coin stamped with the Trident insignia. Around its edge, etched words read, "No orders, no permission, just courage." Her throat tightened. "You made this?" He nodded. "The team did. We don't do medals, we do truth." Raina turned it over in her hand, the metal cool against her palm. "Thank you," she whispered. He clasped her shoulder. "You did what we couldn't. You made the call when we froze. That's not defiance, that's leadership." She looked at him, the man who once dismissed her as the girl with the rifle. Now he stood before her, humbled, grateful. Funny how life teaches faster than rank ever could. 3 days later, she was back on a C-17, the base shrinking beneath her. Hanley sat across the aisle, headphones in, pretending to sleep. She knew he was. You could tell by the way his fingers tapped his thigh, slow, rhythmic, like he was timing invisible shots. As the engines droned, Raina closed her eyes. Images flickered behind them, the ridges, the muzzle flashes, the moment before each decision. She wasn't proud. Pride had no place here. But there was peace, the fragile kind that only came when you'd already accepted the cost. Back in Georgia, her return was quiet. No press, no salutes, no cameras. Just a new posting: instructor, Advanced Sniper Doctrine Division. Different walls, same ghosts. Weeks passed, training, paperwork, repetition. Until one morning, a letter arrived. No markings, no rank stamps, just handwriting she recognized immediately. Marcus Webb. She opened it carefully. Raina, I wanted to put this on record somewhere other than a report. You saved more than lives in those mountains. You saved a belief I'd lost. That courage doesn't come from orders. It comes from conscience. You reminded us what it means to act. If you ever doubt that, remember this. We followed you without you ever asking us to. M. Webb. The words blurred as she read them again and again. She folded the letter gently, placed it inside her range book, between two pages marked with bullet drop tables and wind formulas. Because that's where it belonged, between calculation and instinct, between logic and heart. That evening, the sun dipped low over the range. Raina lay prone again, scope aligned on a distant steel plate 1,000 meters away. She exhaled. Crack. The plate rang, perfect. She whispered under her breath, not to anyone but the wind. For them, always for them. Later, as she packed up her gear, she caught her reflection in the glass of her scope, lines under her eyes, hair streaked with gray. A face older than its years but still unbroken. She thought about the 2 times she'd broken orders, once to save 24, once to save 300. Each time, the system called it disobedience. Each time, history quietly called it something else. That night, sitting on her bunk, she opened her grandfather's old journal, the one he'd left her when he died. The last page held a single line in faded ink. One day, you'll have to choose between doing your duty and doing what's right. The world will tell you they're the same thing. They're not. She smiled faintly. You were right again, Grandpa. She looked out the window, stars faint above the tree line, wind whispering through pine. Somewhere across the ocean, men she'd saved were living their lives, raising kids, laughing, breathing. They'd never know the exact second their fate changed. And she didn't need them to. Because the best things you do in life rarely come with witnesses. Sometimes you don't break orders to disobey. You break them to keep the world human. Why did peace feel so loud? The world around Staff Sergeant Raina Voss had finally gone quiet. No gunfire, no rotors, no radios crackling in the dark. Just the soft rhythm of rain hitting her cabin's tin roof outside Fort Benning. But her mind never stopped firing. Every drop of rain sounded like a round casing hitting stone. Every thunderclap turned into distant artillery. She sat at her kitchen table, uniform folded neatly beside her, coffee steaming in a chipped mug she'd owned since Afghanistan. The medal, that silver star they'd mailed months ago, still sat unopened in its box across the table. It stared at her like an accusation. Outside, the forest was quiet southern pine swaying in humid air. The world kept moving, uncaring, unburdened. But her heart stayed fixed somewhere between past and purpose. She'd been teaching again, long-range theory, wind estimation, overwatch discipline. But lately the classroom had felt wrong. Too bright, too sterile. Every time a trainee missed a shot, she flinched as if someone had died. She'd lost her edge, not the technical one, but the emotional balance between precision and peace. And then one morning, a phone call broke the silence. Staff Sergeant Voss. This is she. Ma'am, this is Command Sergeant Major Hanley, Alex's father. Her breath caught, sir. The man's voice cracked slightly. I thought you should know. My son was killed last night." The world seemed to tilt. "What?" she whispered. "Stateside, highway accident, off-duty, drunk driver crossed the median." She closed her eyes, gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles whitened. I'm sorry," she said softly. "I know you trained him," the man continued. "He talked about you, said you taught him that conscience is a better compass than command. I just wanted you to hear it from me before it hits the newswire." The call ended quietly. Raina sat there, frozen coffee gone cold, heart splitting open again. Hanley, the quiet kid who hesitated before every shot because he cared about what came after. The one who followed her into hell and came back alive, only to die on a highway at home. She pressed a hand over her mouth, the tremor finally breaking loose. All that war, all that survival, and it ended like that. 3 days later, she stood alone at his memorial. A small crowd, mostly local soldiers, quiet under a gray Georgia sky. They played the folded flag song, the one that hollowed you out no matter how many times you'd heard it. When they handed his parents the flag, his mother's knees gave out. Raina stepped forward, steadying her with a hand that didn't stop shaking. Afterward, she walked to the rows of white markers stretching into the mist. She stopped at Hanley's new one. The name still looked too new to belong there. She crouched, brushing rain off the stone. "You deserved more than this, Alex." For the first time in years, she felt the full weight of everything. Every bullet, every body, every choice that bought someone else another day. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "You followed my lead. I was supposed to bring you home for good." The wind carried no answer. That night she couldn't sleep. The rain had stopped, but her mind hadn't. She found herself back at the range, long after dark, rifle laid out on the bench like a confession. The sky was moonless, perfect for thinking, terrible for peace. She lined up a target at 800 meters and stared through her scope. But this time she didn't fire. Because through that glass she saw not a target, but all the faces of those who'd stood behind her, believed in her, and sometimes died before she could save them. The crosshairs blurred. She lowered the rifle and sat back, chest heaving. She wasn't crying for him anymore. She was crying for herself, for all the years she'd spent defining her worth by who she could protect. A few weeks later, command called again. Not for punishment, not for medals, but for advice. "Sergeant Voss," the voice said, "we're developing a new Overwatch doctrine for mixed-unit operations. Commander Webb recommended you lead the review board." Her first instinct was to say no. But Webb's name, the man who once ignored her, then trusted her, then defended her, made her pause. She exhaled slowly. "When do I report?" The Pentagon's walls felt nothing like the field. Clean, air-conditioned, sterile. She sat in a windowless conference room surrounded by officers in fresh uniforms, all talking about metrics, data, engagement probabilities. When they finally asked for her opinion, she leaned forward and said, "You want to know how to save lives? Start by listening to the people you keep ignoring." The room went still. A colonel frowned, meaning. Raina held his gaze. "Meaning stop writing doctrines that look good on paper but kill people in the dirt. Stop silencing the soldier who sees the trap before the satellite does. You can't codify instinct." The colonel stiffened. "With respect, Sergeant, this is a policy board, not a therapy session." She smiled faintly, not amused but sad. "That's exactly the problem." The meeting ended 10 minutes later. Her recommendations would be reviewed. But she knew what that meant: archived, ignored, buried. Still, she walked out calm, because she hadn't come for approval. She'd come to tell the truth one more time. Outside, in the bright DC daylight, she found Webb waiting by the steps. He looked different out of uniform, tired, human. "How'd it go?" he asked. "About as well as you'd expect." He smirked. "You still don't know how to keep quiet, huh?" She shrugged. "Never learned." They stood in silence for a while, watching the traffic move, ordinary people living ordinary lives. Finally, Webb said, "Hanley's folks wrote me, told me you came to the funeral." Raina's eyes softened. "He was a good kid." "He was," Webb agreed. "He believed in you." Her voice lowered. "That's what scares me." "Why?" "Because people keep believing in me. And sometimes I think I ran out of faith for myself a long time ago." Webb looked at her, not as a commander, but as someone who understood the cost of survival. "Then borrow ours," he said quietly, "until you find yours again." Weeks passed. Raina declined the next few invitations, lectures, interviews, documentaries. Everyone wanted her to tell her story. No one wanted to hear the parts that actually mattered. But one day, a letter arrived from Hanley's mother. "Raina, Alex used to write me about you. He said you saw people, not just soldiers. He said you taught him that doing what's right is rarely easy, but it's always worth doing. I wanted you to know that you didn't just save my son once. You changed the way he saw himself. That's something no accident can erase." Raina read it twice, then 3 times. And something in her chest shifted, not healed, but softened. She folded the letter and tucked it next to Webb, in the same range book she carried everywhere. The book that now held not just calculations, but memories of conscience. Months later, she found herself back at Fort Benning, standing before a new class of sniper candidates. 20 young faces, all hungry for precision, discipline, purpose. She watched them adjust scopes, load magazines, whisper range estimates, the same ritual she once lived by. When the whistle blew, she said quietly, "Put your rifles down." The trainees froze. She walked slowly between them, boots crunching on gravel. "Before you ever fire a shot, remember something." The recruits watched her, some nervous, some curious. "You're not out here to take life," she said softly. "You're out here to protect it. The trigger is just a tool. The judgment behind it, that's the weapon." She looked at each one, seeing bits of herself in all of them. "You'll be told to follow orders. And you should, until the moment your heart tells you someone's about to die because of those orders. That's when you'll understand what this job really means." Silence, the kind that sinks deep. Then she smiled faintly. "All right, load up. Let's make your first shot count." Later that night, she stayed behind as the others left. The air was heavy with twilight, the horizon painted gold and red. She unpacked her rifle, set it on the bench, and watched the sun dip behind the tree line. The world was quieter now, or maybe she was. She didn't believe in destiny anymore, but she believed in choice, in the small, defiant act of doing what's right when nobody's watching. She'd lost soldiers, saved hundreds, broken rules, paid for every one of them in sleepless nights. But as she looked out over the empty range, she whispered, almost to herself, "I'd do it again." The wind stirred the grass, carrying her words into the distance. Because somewhere out there, another young soldier was waiting, someone who'd face their own impossible choice someday. And maybe when that moment came, they'd remember her story. Not as legend, not as rebellion, but as permission to act when conscience speaks louder than command. Because in the end, humanity isn't protected by orders. It's protected by those who dare to break them for the right reasons. How long can someone outrun their own legend? Raina Voss had spent the last 3 years trying to find out. The world had moved on, new conflicts, new soldiers, new stories. But somehow, her name kept circling back through quiet corners of the military like an echo that refused to die. 2 operations saved by unauthorized action. 248 confirmed lives protected. 2 reprimands quietly buried. Some called her reckless, others called her a hero. She didn't answer to either. Instead, she'd retired early, unofficially, quietly, moving north to Montana, the same land where her grandfather had once taught her that patience killed more enemies than bullets ever could. Her days were slower now. Mornings spent repairing fence lines, afternoons with her rifle slung across her back, hiking through the high grass to chase coyotes that preyed on her neighbor's livestock. The rifle was different now, a simple bolt-action hunting gun, not the sleek M110 that once spoke the language of war. But her habits hadn't changed. She still cleaned it nightly, still logged wind and elevation in an old notebook, still waited for dusk like it was an appointment with fate. Peace, she'd learned, was fragile, and she didn't quite trust it. One evening, as she sat on her porch watching the sky burn orange, a black SUV rolled up her dirt road. She knew that sound before she saw it. Government-grade engine, soft suspension, tinted windows. It stopped in front of her cabin. Two men stepped out, one young, the other older, both in civilian clothes that fit too precisely to be civilian. "Staff Sergeant Raina Voss," the older one asked. She didn't stand, just looked at him over her coffee mug. "Not anymore." "May we sit?" "That depends. Who are you with?" "Joint Special Operations Command. We're here on behalf of Commander Marcus Webb." Her hand froze halfway to the mug. "Webb." The younger man nodded. "Yes, ma'am. He requested you personally." She stared past them toward the distant ridge. The wind moved through the grass, whispering like an old friend. "What happened?" she asked quietly. "Extraction op gone wrong," the older man said. "Mountain region, northern Pakistan. Task Force Echo is pinned. Command believes Webb is among the cut-off personnel." Her heart thudded once, hard enough that she felt it in her throat. "How bad?" "Bad enough that they're calling in ghosts." She exhaled. "And you think I still believe in saving ghosts?" The younger one looked uncomfortable. "He left this for you." He handed her a small sealed envelope. Inside, a single line written in Webb's sharp, block handwriting. "If I don't make it home, tell her I should have listened sooner." Her jaw clenched. The coffee suddenly tasted like metal. "When do we leave?" she asked. 48 hours later, Raina was back in a world she thought she'd buried. Different country, same smell, dust, oil, adrenaline. They inserted her under darkness, flying low over the same rugged spines that had haunted her dreams for years. The mission brief was simple: locate Task Force Echo, provide overwatch, extract survivors. The official command structure didn't know she was there, just like old times. As the helicopter dropped altitude, she checked her gear. Not the new tech-laden rifles everyone carried now, but her own M110, the same one she'd kept all these years, stored and maintained like a relic. Every scratch on its receiver told a story. Every dent had a name. She ran her hand over it and whispered, "One more time, old friend." The helicopter banked, engines straining against the thin air. The crew chief's voice cut through her headset. "LZ in 30 seconds. We'll set you on high ground, then pull back to holding pattern." Raina nodded. "Copy." As the ramp dropped, cold air hit like a slap, sharp, dry, thin. She jumped, landed in knee-high grass, rolled, came up, crouched, rifle up, eyes scanning. The bird vanished into the black, leaving her alone with the wind and the distant echoes of war. For 2 hours she climbed. Each breath burned. Her pack felt heavier than ever, or maybe she was just older now. But her mind was razor-sharp. The mountain was an old language, and she still remembered every word. Finally she reached the ridge, crawled to the edge, unfolded her tripod, mounted her rifle, and peered through the scope. Their faint heat signatures flickering along the valley floor. 10, maybe 12 men huddled near rock cover, and above them flashes, gunfire. She adjusted focus, her stomach twisted. The trapped men wore American gear. Their patches caught the moonlight. And at the center of it, Webb. His posture was unmistakable even after years apart. Still calm, still steady, still refusing to die quietly. "Of course it's you," she whispered. She radioed in. Overwatch to command. Visual on Task Force Echo. Multiple hostile positions, 300 meters above them on the southern slope. The comm crackled. "Acknowledged Overwatch, we're tasking air support." She frowned. "You'll never get birds in here with this crosswind. They'll be exposed." "Negative engage until authorized." Raina laughed, a dry, humorless sound swallowed by the wind. History, it seemed, loved to repeat itself. She turned the radio off. Through the scope she tracked the attackers, 8, no, 9 of them, moving in fire teams, coordinated. They'd pin Webb's group until daylight, then finish the job. Her finger found the trigger. Her mind found the moment. Wind steady, range 1275, elevation +20. She exhaled, the air shaking in her lungs from more than the cold. And then she fired. The shot cracked like the sky splitting open. Through the scope, one attacker dropped, then another, the rest scattered for cover. Down in the valley, Webb's head snapped up. He looked around, scanning the ridges, then into the night where he couldn't see her. But somehow he knew. "Overwatch," his voice came through faintly, barely audible under static. Raina smiled, even as her eyes burned. "Yeah, Marcus, it's me." She worked in rhythm, calm, patient, mechanical. Every pull of the trigger brought back muscle memory she thought she'd lost. Every hit echoed with old ghosts and fresh purpose. Hanley's voice still whispered in her mind, reminding her of conscience, not command. She fired until the ridge fell silent. Then finally, she exhaled, shoulders trembling. "Task Force, enemy retreating southwest. You're clear for exfil," she radioed. Webb's reply came after a pause. "Copy that. You just couldn't follow orders even if you tried, huh?" "Wouldn't know how," she said softly. He laughed, the same low laugh she hadn't heard in years. "Stay put. We're coming to you." 30 minutes later, she saw them climbing toward her position. The survivors' faces drawn, uniforms torn, eyes hollow but alive. Webb led them. He looked older now, the years carved deep, but when he saw her, he stopped and just stared. "Didn't think you'd actually come," he said finally. "Neither did I." He stepped closer. "You saved me again." Raina shook her head. "No, just corrected the same mistake twice." He smiled faintly. "You know, I used to think disobeying orders was a weakness. And now I think it's the only reason any of us are still breathing." She looked out across the valley, the dawn creeping over the mountains like fire on snow. "Some things don't change," she said. He followed her gaze. "Some things shouldn't." Extraction arrived 2 hours later. The survivors boarded the bird one by one, each giving her a nod or a quiet ma'am. Respect born of what they'd seen, not what they'd read. Webb waited until the end. "You coming?" Raina looked down at the valley, the same kind of valley that had started everything years ago. "I'll take the next flight," she said. He studied her. "You're not done, are you?" She smiled faintly. "Maybe I just need one more quiet minute before the noise starts again." He hesitated, then handed her a small data card. "Drone footage. The world should see what you did tonight, not for glory, for truth." She closed his hand back over it. "No, Marcus, some truths work better as rumors." He nodded slowly, then with a rare softness said, "You're the best I ever served with." She didn't reply, just watched as the helicopter lifted, blades cutting through dawn, carrying him away again. When the sound faded, she sat down on the edge of the ridge, rifle across her knees. The sunrise painted everything gold, even the scars on her hands. For the first time she felt still. Not because the fighting was over, but because she'd finally accepted what she was. Not a hero, not a rebel, just someone who refused to let orders define humanity. The kind of soldier who didn't wait for permission to do what was right. She looked at the horizon, voice barely above a whisper. Maybe that's all we ever are, just people trying to do right in a world that punishes you for it. The wind answered, soft and endless. And for the first time in her life, Raina Voss didn't feel the need to shoot, to fight, or to prove anything. She just watched the light crawl across the mountains she'd once feared and loved in equal measure. Sometimes the world doesn't need another hero. It just needs someone who remembers what mercy looks like through a scope. What happens when the war finally ends, but the soldier does? The mountain wind had gone still. The last helicopter was long gone, leaving Raina Voss alone on the ridge, just her rifle, and a silence that felt almost holy. She sat for a while, watching the sun rise through the thin air, its light spilling over the same peaks that had once swallowed whole battalions. The same mountains where she'd first been ignored, doubted, dismissed. The same mountains where she disobeyed and saved 24 men. And now the same mountains where she'd done it again, one last time. It felt full circle, almost like the world was giving her a chance to set her own ending. She didn't take pictures, didn't call in a report, didn't record a log entry. Some stories, she thought, don't need paperwork. They just need to be lived. By the time she made it back to the forward base, command already knew what she'd done. The whispers spread fast. The ghost of Hill 842 is back. Some called her a liability, others called her a legend. But when she stepped off that helicopter, no one said a word. They just stared and moved out of her way. She walked straight to the command tent. Webb was inside, sitting on a cot with a bandaged arm and the same look he'd worn the night she'd saved him the first time, a mixture of awe, frustration, and respect. "You made it back," he said. "You didn't think I would. I stopped trying to predict you years ago." She smiled faintly, probably wise. He looked at her for a long moment. "You know, there's a word for what you keep doing." "Yeah." "Defiance." She shook her head. No compassion, just dressed in camouflage. He laughed softly, then his tone turned serious. "They're going to debrief us again. JAG, CENTCOM, probably half of Washington." "Let them," she said. "This time I'm not explaining myself. I did what needed to be done." He nodded slowly. "You always do." 3 weeks later, she was back in the States. Her name hit a few reports, surfaced in a few quiet Pentagon briefings. Independent sniper engagement, unsanctioned but effective. They never said her name aloud. But everyone who mattered already knew. One night Webb called from an unlisted number. His voice sounded older, tired but peaceful. "They're giving me retirement papers," he said. "Said I need rest." "You do," Raina said quietly. "You know, I used to think following orders was the highest form of loyalty. And now I think loyalty's doing the right thing when no one's watching." She smiled. "Took you long enough." He chuckled. "Yeah, you were always ahead of me." There was a pause, the kind that sits heavy between two people who have been through too much to pretend anymore. "Take care of yourself, Raina," he said. "You too, Marcus." The line went dead, but his words stayed. Months passed. Raina didn't go back to Fort Benning this time. She stayed in Montana, quiet, unseen, almost forgotten. She fixed fences, helped local ranchers during storms, spent hours on the porch, listening to the wind cut across the open fields like an old song she used to know by heart. At night, she'd sometimes unbox the rifle, set it across her knees and just sit there. Not to shoot, just to remember. To remember the weight of choice, the rhythm of breath, the cost of pulling the trigger for the right reasons. One morning, she drove into town for supplies. The clerk behind the counter, a kid barely 20, looked up and said, "Hey, you're her, right? The sniper lady, the one from the story." Raina froze. "What story?" He grinned. "They talked about it online. said there was this woman sniper who saved a bunch of SEALs twice. Nobody knew her name, but they called her the one who didn't wait for orders. She stared at him for a long moment, then smiled faintly. Sounds like she's got bad habits. He laughed, maybe, but sounds like she did the right thing. Maybe she just got lucky, she said softly. He shook his head. No, ma'am, luck doesn't save 300 people, that's something else. She paid for her supplies, thanked him and walked out. But in the parking lot, she sat behind the wheel for a long time, the words echoing in her chest. The one who didn't wait for orders. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Maybe both. That evening, the sun dipped behind the ridge like it always did, steady, patient, timeless. Raina sat on her porch, writing in her old range book. Only now, the notes weren't about distance or wind. They were about people, lessons, the things she'd learned too late to teach in uniform. She wrote slowly, carefully. You are not your orders. You are the silence between them. Listen to that silence. It will tell you when something's wrong. Trust it. It won't save everyone, but it will save who you can. She closed the book and set it beside her. The air was cool now, the sky deep blue fading to violet. For a long time, she just watched the horizon, that endless edge where everything had begun and ended for her. A car pulled up quietly at the end of her drive. She recognized it before she saw who stepped out, Webb's old staff driver, still in civilian clothes. He walked up slowly, carrying a small envelope. From the commander, he said softly. Raina took it, hesitating. Is he? The driver nodded gently. He passed last week. Heart attack, peaceful, no pain. Raina's eyes lowered. Thank you. The man nodded once, saluted quietly, and left her alone. She stood there a long time before opening the envelope. Inside was a folded piece of paper, Webb's handwriting again. If you're reading this, I didn't make it home. But that's all right. You taught me that home isn't a place, it's the people you'd break the rules for. Don't carry guilt for what we did. We didn't save everyone, but we saved enough. That's all soldiers like us can ever hope for. Tears blurred the ink until she couldn't read anymore. She folded it carefully, placed it next to the others, Hanley's letter, his mother's note, her grandfather's final words. 3 generations of truth, all saying the same thing in different ways. The right thing isn't always the ordered thing. Weeks later, she finally went shooting again. Not in war, not for training, just to remember who she was when the world made sense through glass and distance. She hiked up the ridge behind her cabin, same slope, same wind, same smell of sage and dust. She set a target 900 meters out, prone behind her rifle. Her hands were steady, her heart wasn't racing, her mind was quiet. She looked through the scope, and for the first time saw not war, not duty, but life. A hawk gliding overhead, a herd of elk moving across the far hill. The world was alive, untouched. She didn't pull the trigger. She just smiled. She stayed there until the sun sank below the earth, her rifle cooling beside her. And in that stillness, she understood something she never could during the missions, the orders, the chaos. That courage wasn't the act of firing under pressure. It was the choice to stop when you no longer had to prove you could. That night, a storm rolled through the valley. Rain swept across the plains, drumming against her roof like applause from a world that had finally forgiven her. Inside, she sat by the window watching lightning trace the sky, her reflection faint in the glass, older now, but peaceful. She whispered softly to the storm, to the ghosts, to the memory of every soldier she'd fought beside. I'm done waiting for orders. She smiled. And I think I finally understand what that means. The next morning the sky was clear, the world knew again. A neighbor found her on the porch, coffee mug in hand. Rifle leaned gently against the wall beside her, still and calm. as if she'd fallen asleep mid-thought. On the table beside her sat her range book, left open to one final line written in her precise, looping script. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. The wind carried those words across the valley, through the pine, across the same mountains that had once known her name. And somewhere far beyond sight, beyond sound, the world grew a little quieter. Not because war had ended, but because one soldier finally had. And that's how legends die, not with noise, but with peace earned one breath, one bullet, one impossible choice at a time.